There is a place where you can stand alone in front of a 600-year-old stone giant at sunrise, with nothing around you but ocean wind and the sound of the Pacific 200 meters below. No crowd, no ticket queue, no audio guide telling you where to look. Most of the world hasn't found it yet. The ones who have don't stop talking about it. Rapa Nui, Easter Island, is the kind of destination that doesn't just become your favorite trip. It becomes the trip everything else gets compared to. Here is what is actually there and why it is unlike anything else on Earth. The wrong story about the collapse. For decades, Easter Island was taught in schools and documented in films as the ultimate cautionary tale. A civilization so obsessed with building their stone giants that they cut down every tree on the island to move them, eroded the soil, ran out of food, went to war, and collapsed. The story was tidy, moralistic, and almost completely wrong. Here is what actually happened, and researchers only confirmed this recently. When the first Polynesian settlers arrived around 800 to 1100 AD, they brought something with them that no documentary about this island ever focuses on: rats, Polynesian rats, stowed away on canoes. Within a generation, those rats did something that no human logging operation could have done as efficiently. They ate the seeds of the island's palm trees before those seeds could germinate into new growth. Research now shows that rat predation was a primary driver of Easter Island's deforestation, not logging for statue transport. Then there's the statues themselves. The popular image, hundreds of slaves dragging giants on wooden rollers, has now been overturned by physics. A study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in late 2025, led by archaeologist Carl Lipo and anthropologist Terry Hunt, confirmed what Rapa Nui oral tradition had been saying for centuries. The Moai walked, not metaphorically. They were rocked upright in a controlled zigzag motion using ropes attached to their heads, swaying like a refrigerator being moved down a hallway. The statues were deliberately carved with a forward lean and curved bases, engineering features designed for this exact transport method. The roads leading from the quarry are concave in cross-section, shaped to guide the rocking motion. And the broken statues along those roads? Their fracture patterns show vertical impact stress, consistent with falling from a standing position, not from horizontal transport. The oral tradition that the Moai walked wasn't mythology, it was the instruction manual. And what about the supposed collapse? The population of Rapa Nui before European contact never exceeded about 3,900 people, not 20,000, not 10,000. The island simply couldn't have supported a larger population, which researchers confirmed by mapping the ancient stone gardens used for farming. There was no catastrophic crash. There was a stable, ingenious civilization that adapted to difficult conditions for centuries. The collapse came later, and it came from outside. The statues never had faces. Here is something almost no documentary tells you. The Moai you are looking at right now are blind. They have always been blind. Every Moai you have ever seen in a photograph, in a film, in a documentary, was eyeless, because the eyes were the last thing added, and they were only added for ceremonies. In 1979, archaeologist Sergio Rapu Hawa, himself a native Rapa Nui, was excavating at one of the ceremonial platforms when his team began finding fragments of white coral in the soil. They didn't know what they were. When they pieced them together, they realized they were looking at the whites of a Moai's eyes. Large, almond-shaped coral inlays. The iris was a separate piece, black obsidian or red volcanic scoria. The eye sockets on the Moai are not decorative features. They are empty frames, waiting. The statues were carved at the quarry without eyes. They were transported without eyes. They were erected on their platforms without eyes. Only then, during specific ceremonial occasions, were the coral eyes inserted into the sockets, angled slightly upward toward the sky. The moment the eyes went in, the statue was no longer stone. In Rapa Nui belief, the ancestor entered the body. The Moai became an Aringa aura, a living face. The mana, the spiritual power, was only activated by the gaze. When the ceremony ended, we don't fully know what happened to the eyes. Most were likely removed and stored, which means every Moai standing on every Ahu platform, staring inland over the community it was meant to protect, was doing so with hollow sockets, watching over its people with the memory of eyes. The writing no one can read. In January 1864, a French missionary named Eugène Ayrault arrived on Rapa Nui and found something that stopped him cold. Everywhere, in homes, in ceremonial spaces, stacked against walls, were wooden tablets and staffs covered in rows of miniature carved figures, human shapes, birds, plants, geometric marks, running in neat, dense lines across carefully prepared surfaces. He estimated there were around 2,000 of them. Today, there are 27. The script on those tablets is called Rongorongo. It is the only known pre-20th century writing system from all of Oceania, the entire Pacific. And after more than 160 years of effort by linguists, cryptographers, and computational scientists, it has never been deciphered. Not one word. This is not a failure of effort, it is a failure of survival. Because Rongorongo didn't simply fade away, it was obliterated by a specific sequence of catastrophes, each one completing what the previous had started. The slave raids of 1862, we will come to those, took the island's entire class of Tangata Rongorongo, the trained scribes who could read and chant these texts. The missionaries who arrived shortly after burned the tablets as pagan objects. Survivors, converting to Christianity, burned their own tablets to prove their faith. Others burned them for warmth. By the time Bishop Jowson of Tahiti understood what was being destroyed and began collecting them, the community of readers was already gone. What did Rongorongo say? We know a little. Some tablets appear to record genealogies, others may be astronomical calendars. Some scholars believe they recorded victim lists from warfare. The Rapa Nui word for fish was also used for sacrificial victims, and certain tablets seem to be structured around that symbolism. But the full content, the history, the cosmology, the law, the literature of a people who built a civilization on the most isolated place on Earth remains locked inside 27 wooden objects scattered across museums in Santiago, Rome, St. Petersburg, and Washington. None of them are on Easter Island, not one. The year they chose a king with an egg. Somewhere around the mid-18th century, the Moai stopped. Not because the civilization collapsed, because the island invented something more urgent than monuments. The Birdman cult, Tangata Manu, replaced ancestor worship as Rapa Nui's dominant religion and political system. And its mechanics are unlike anything else recorded in human history. Here is how it worked. Each spring, priests called Ivy Atua, who could be men or women, would enter a prophetic trance. From that trance, they revealed the names of the men who would compete to become the island's ruler. Those men were the chiefs, but the chiefs themselves did not compete. Each chief nominated a proxy, a younger, fitter man called a Hopu Manu, who would do the physical contest on his behalf. The ceremonial village of Orongo sat on the narrowest ridge imaginable, a volcanic crater on one side, a sheer cliff dropping 1,000 feet into the Pacific on the other. The width of the ridge in places was barely the span of a man's arms. The village of stone houses here was built not for comfort, but for the specific purpose of this annual contest. From Orongo, the Hopu Manu climbed down that 1,000-foot cliff, entered the water, and swam 300 meters through shark-infested Pacific swells to a trio of small rocky islets, Motu Nui, Motu Iti, and the needle-thin Motu Kau Kau. There they would wait for days, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, in sea caves, surviving on dried banana and sweet potato skins, waiting for the sooty turn to lay its first egg of the season. The moment an egg was found, the Hopu Manu strapped it to his forehead in a small reed basket. Then he swam back. Then he climbed the cliff. Then he ran to Orongo and presented the egg to his patron chief, who then shaved his own head and painted it white or red, That chief became the Tangata Manu, the Birdman, ruler of the island's resources for 1 year, an incarnation of the god Make, sacred, tapu, untouchable. The competition ran for approximately 200 years, from around 1680 to 1866, when Catholic missionaries ended it. Over 100 stone carvings of birdmen, human bodies, bird heads, clutching an egg, still cover the rocks at Orongo. Each one may represent a different winner's year of reign. The last recorded Tangata Manu was a man named Rakunga, who won in 1866 or 1867. After him, the egg hunt was replaced by the Eucharist, and the cliff divers became choir boys. The year the island almost ceased to exist. By 1860, Easter Island had a population of about 3,000 people. By 1877, it had 111. Between those two dates, something happened that most world histories don't cover at all. In December 1862, 8 Peruvian ships arrived off the coast of Rapa Nui. They weren't explorers, they were slave raiders, operating in the trade known as blackbirding, supplying labor for Peru's guano mines and plantations. Over the next several months, they captured between 1,400 and 2,000 people, roughly half the island's remaining population. Among those taken were the island's paramount chief, his heir, and virtually every person trained in reading and writing Rongorongo. The Peruvian government, under diplomatic pressure from France and Britain, eventually freed the surviving captives, but most had died in the mines. Of the estimated 1,408 taken as slaves, only around a dozen were still alive to return home, and when they did, they brought smallpox. An epidemic swept through the remaining population. Tuberculosis, already circulating from whale ship contacts, killed more. Then came a French colonist named Jean-Baptiste Dutroux-Bornier, who bought up virtually all land outside the missionaries' area, consolidated the island as a personal estate, and shipped hundreds of the remaining Rapa Nui to Tahiti as plantation labor. When the missionaries themselves, horrified, evacuated 275 more people to Mangareva, the island was left with barely 230 inhabitants, mostly older men. By 1877, 111 people. Of those, only 36 had any living children. Dutroux-Bornier was murdered in 1876, reportedly in a dispute over a dress, though his documented habit of abducting pubescent girls may have been the more honest motivation. Too late to matter. The people who exist today on Rapa Nui are the descendants of those 111. Everything that was known, the chants, the genealogies, the meaning of Rongorongo, the names of the Moai, the full protocol of the Birdman contest, the oral histories reaching back to the first canoe, was carried by people who were taken to die in a guano mine. What survived is what those 111 could still remember. The civilization that never actually collapsed here is the revision that changes everything. When the palm forests disappeared, partly by human clearing, massively by rat predation, the Rapa Nui people did not despair. They did not collapse. They invented something. Lithic mulching, they shattered volcanic rocks and layered them across their fields, creating stone-protected gardens called manavai. The rocks trapped moisture. They released minerals back into the volcanic soil. They shielded plants from the island's wind. It was an agricultural technology born entirely from necessity and environmental observation, and it worked. The island maintained a stable population for centuries without its forests. Researchers mapping these ancient rock gardens using satellite imagery and machine learning found they covered enormous areas of the island, far more than anyone had previously documented. The population these gardens could sustainably support, around 3,900 people, the same number the archaeological record suggests actually lived here, not a civilization that overshot and collapsed, a civilization that measured its own limits and engineered itself to fit within them. The stone giants weren't the obsession that killed them. They were the social cohesion that held them together. Building a Moai required every clan to contribute. Stone carvers, rope makers, farmers feeding the workers, priests guiding the rituals. The Moai were not vanity projects. They were the mechanism by which a community of a few thousand people on a rock in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth stayed coherent. Life at the edge. Now, about 8,000 people live on Easter Island today. Roughly half are ethnic Rapa Nui. The rest are Chilean mainlanders who arrived after Chile formally annexed the island in 1888, a process the Rapa Nui people were never actually asked about. For much of the 20th century, the indigenous population was confined to the single town of Hangaroa by a fence, their movement across their own island restricted by Chilean authorities until 1966. The Rapa Nui language is spoken by perhaps 1,000 people out of around 9,000 ethnically Rapa Nui worldwide. It is classified as vulnerable. Children on the island are taught in Spanish, the language that carried the Birdman chants, the Moai dedications, the names of every ancestor, is endangered in its only homeland. There are no other inhabited islands nearby. The closest land with permanent human settlement is the Pitcairn Islands, itself one of the most isolated communities on Earth, 1,200 miles to the west. Santiago, Chile is 2,300 miles to the east. A flight there takes 5 hours. There is one airline, one flight route. If a storm grounds it, Rapa Nui is cut off from the world. There is no hospital that can perform surgery. Serious medical cases are airlifted out. The island's fresh water comes from 3 volcanic crater lakes. The food supply is almost entirely imported. The economic model depends almost entirely on tourism, which means the 7.5 million acres of surrounding ocean, one of the least fished, most pristine stretches of Pacific, is not enough to sustain the people living above it. The Moai face inland, almost all of them, their backs to the sea, their eyes watching over the villages, the fields, the people, the living descendants of whoever that particular ancestor once was. From the water, from a ship, you would see only stone backs. The statues have nothing to say to the ocean. Everything they have to say is directed inward, toward the community, toward the living. That might be the most honest thing about this place. For 1,000 years, the people of Rapa Nui were not trying to impress the horizon. They were not performing for outsiders. They were taking care of each other, on a rock in the middle of nowhere, in the most isolated inhabited place on Earth, where there is no one else to depend on and never has been. They didn't collapse. They were attacked. They were enslaved. They were reduced to 111 people, and their language was nearly buried with the dead. And they are still here. Almost every destination on Earth has a backup plan built into it. Another city nearby, a road out, a border to cross if things get hard. Rapa Nui has none of that. It never did. The people who built those stone giants, who swam through shark-filled waters for an egg, who reduced their entire world to 111 survivors and still did not leave. They did not have the option of somewhere else. This island was everything. The ocean was not a highway. It was a wall, and somehow from inside that wall they created one of the most remarkable cultures the human world has ever produced. A writing system unique in all of Oceania, a form of government decided by an egg, stone ancestors with coral eyes, activated only by ceremony, watching over fields and families for centuries. They didn't build all of this despite the isolation. They built it because of it. If Rapa Nui is on your travel list, move it up. Not because it is comfortable or convenient, because it is neither. Move it up because there is nowhere else on Earth where you will feel the full weight of what human beings are capable of when they have nothing to rely on but each other and the ground beneath their feet. And if this video made you see this island differently, if something here surprised you or changed the story you thought you knew, drop it in the comments. I read everyone. If you want more videos like this, places that go deeper than the surface, stories that don't make it into the guidebooks, subscribe. There are more of these coming. And until the next one, keep going to the places that ask something of you.